Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Parker. Thank you for joining us. It's a very hot evening in the DC metro area. We're very happy. We hope that you are hydrating and staying cool in this weather.
Purposely muted.
I'm the project coordinator for community engagement for the RCMI program here at Howard University College of Medicine. RCMI, for those of you who are not familiar, stands for Research Centers in Minority Institutions. And this evening, I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleagues, Kristen, Elisha, and Miranda, and Dr. Williams. Over to you, Elisha.
Thank you, Karen, and good evening, everyone. My name is Elisha Barrientos. I am one of the community engagement specialists on our team, and I will be giving you a brief overview over what we do here. The RCMI program focuses on enhancing and developing necessary research infrastructure that ensures Howard University's ability to contribute to the resolution of diseases that disproportionately affect disadvantaged and minority populations. Our group, the Community Engagement Core's primary goal is to ensure that RCMI-supported research addresses the needs and interests of the local community. To achieve this, we partner with local community organizations to address health-related concerns, promote community participation in research in partnership with researchers in study design and execution, and ensure research findings are shared with relevant communities. So tonight's conversation with you is critical to our work. This core is led by Dr. Carla Williams. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Elisha. I'm going to just take a moment right here to give a little bit of insight into why we do what we do, which is to help increase research literacy in our communities. And I'm just going to try to explain that very quickly by this image of what we call the 6 R's of research. The first R is representation. That is, does the research include people like you and me? The next R is regulation. And that means, are the methods in the research ethical and are you protected? Do you know if the researchers have any conflicts of interest? Was an ethics and safety review done before the research was approved? And will you be able to learn what the study is about and ask questions, which is a process called informed consent? The next R that we have is replication. Will the study produce the same results if you repeat it? The next R that we have is rigor. Do the results represent what is real? The next R that we have is review. Represents public review and peer review by experts in the field. That is, will other experts view this research as high quality and significant? And finally, we have relevance. So after we've done all this, so what? How is this research going to affect your day-to-day decisions? So now we're going to move on to tonight's exciting roundtable where we get to hear your voice. We have 3 community members at our table this evening. First up is Dr. Yolandra Hancock. She's a public health champion, board certified pediatrician, family health and wellness expert, and the medical director of the CRC Health and Wellness Group. As well, at the roundtable this evening, we have Mr. Kamon Freeman. He's well known in the community. He is the co-founder of We Act Radio, the director of the National Black Love Festival. He is an activist, artist, and playwright, and he asked very specifically that I refer to him as the angry Black man in therapy. It's very important. Closing out our roundtable, we have Tracy Faulkner, Dr. Tracy Faulkner, who is a faculty member and affiliate at Nova Southeastern University College of Pharmacy. She is also a pharmacist in the CareSync Concierge School of Remote Care, and she specializes in medical navigation for long-term disease care. The other roundtable guest this evening is you. So as a part of your registration to participate with us this evening, you may have submitted questions, beliefs. I want to stop here and thank everyone for your contributions. This is going to be an open conversation. We would just like to lay a couple of ground rules that you please be respectful. You may be invited to come on mic, so when you do, you may ask your question, and please feel free to participate. This is not about us talking, this is about listening. We really want to hear your voice, your experiences, your beliefs, etc. I'm going to stop right here to see if anyone has any disclosure statements to make. If no, we'll proceed. We thought it would be relevant to share this image that, especially now, and especially in light of the news that came out this morning about our President Biden, COVID is still very much a thing out here. And as you can see, it's popping. This slide represents some of the beliefs that our neighbors sent forward to us. I'll just take a minute. These are beliefs about COVID, excuse me. These are beliefs about the vaccine. I think I'd like to start with you, Dr. Hancock. Could you please let us know how you'd like for us to address you? Is it Dr. Hancock or your other name?
We can go with Dr. Yola. That's fine with me.
Very well. Welcome, Dr. Yola. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Could you give us some background, please, on what your experience has been as a clinician and the types of questions, are these the types of questions that you're getting in clinic?
So I am both a pediatrician and an obesity medicine specialist. My other half of my career is in public health. I have my master's in public health from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And a lot of my time over the past 2.5 years have really been about answering questions about both COVID and the COVID-19 vaccine. And so the questions that I see in front of me are questions that have been floating around really since the beginning of the pandemic, particularly around the preventable aspects of the pandemic, where the virus came from. Is it specifically designed for population control? Because there were, I think it reflects, and I'm glad we're having this space to talk, it reflects one, a level of distrust, and understandably so, in the medical community and the scientific community, but it's also a reflection of where we collectively within our community have to address health literacy issues, navigating through understanding how viruses are created, how they mutate, how vaccines are created, and what their purpose is.
Thank you. And can you speak to some of the beliefs that you're seeing here on screen here about COVID not being able to be eradicated? For example, the question that's the belief that's on the left, that COVID cannot be eradicated.
Sure, I can sort of walk through the slide.
Yes, please.
I think part of part of where we are 2+ years out is a feeling of almost inevitability, where it's just like COVID isn't going anywhere. It's not going to be eradicated. It's like, I always think about it like a scary movie. Everybody's huddled up in the house because the murderer is outside. And like the folks are so tired of being out, they're like, screw it, I'm just gonna run out and take my chances. That's the sense I'm getting from a lot of people because they feel like COVID is around to stay. What I will tell you is that COVID is likely around to stay in the same way that influenza, the common cold virus, strep, all of those other respiratory infections are within our community. It's now what we call endemic. The difference between pandemic, epidemic, and endemic: epidemic is that there's a certain number of cases across the globe. Pandemic is that there is a significant number of cases in almost every country. And then endemic is a lower number of cases, like the numbers that we should expect on an annual basis with infectious diseases. The challenge with COVID is that we don't necessarily have a strong public health infrastructure in this country, and I'm not going to blame it on any particular administration. I think that there are challenges in every administration in terms of how public health is prioritized in this country. But because of some of the challenges that we had early on in limiting the spread of COVID, it facilitated it being around to stay. Part of the other challenge with COVID is that it's so easily transmissible and does not cause for a large percentage of people severe illness and death. It doesn't kill off its host. So something like Ebola, SARS and MERS. SARS and MERS are actually coronaviruses themselves. Because they cause such severe infection really quickly, there isn't a lot of spread because the person usually dies due to the infection. With over 80% of people having asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic disease, it makes COVID a lot easier to spread and people becoming more comfortable with having it. So do I believe that COVID will be eradicated? No, it's here to stay. It's what we need to do as a community to minimize our risk and to decrease the spread. In terms of it being an experiment created to kill Black people, what I will remind everyone of is in 2020, when this virus first hit the United States, the media and the community believed, given the numbers, that Black folks weren't getting it. It was folks who had traveled to either Europe or to Asia, predominantly white, lower middle income groups. And then the peak of the pandemic, at least at that point, happened, and we became disproportionately impacted from March to April. Like in March, this wasn't about us. By April, we were already recognizing that African Americans and other communities of color were disproportionately impacted by infection, hospitalizations, and deaths. And it wasn't that this was a scientific experiment meant to kill us. What it reflected was some of the other health issues that we as people of color in this community or in this country have dealt with well before COVID showed up. Something called health disparities and income disparities. The main risk factor for people of color, particularly Black folks, coming down with COVID was employment. Employment was what led us to get COVID. It's the chronic health conditions that folks tried to make us feel like put us at more risk that increased our risk of having severe symptoms. So it wasn't designed to kill us. What I would say is this system that we live in, the medical system and the public health system that we have survived and occasionally thrived through, has not necessarily facilitated us having equitable access to everything needed for us to achieve a healthier lifestyle. That's housing, transportation, all of those things. And so that's why it feels like it was designed to take us out, but it really is more a reflection of the systems in which we live that increase our risk of having COVID and developing complications from it. In terms of the other ones, the pandemic, was it preventable? There is no, like once an infectious disease shows up, for instance, we just had a new case after 10 years of polio. I'm sure a lot of folks probably don't even know what polio is and how it shows up unless you're over the age of 50. It is preventable. So that one case in New York, if we capture it, we find out who that person came in contact with, we can control the spread of polio really quickly if we have the right infrastructure. It's the same thing with COVID-19. Because there were some delays in how we responded, I know that there were patients who presented with COVID well before we classified it as that here in this country, because we knew that COVID was happening in Asia for months before it showed up here. And so I don't speculate as to whether or not it was preventable. Certainly the number of people who have lost their lives and come down with COVID, we could have certainly decreased those numbers. Is it deadly depending on severity and whether or not you've been vaccinated? Absolutely. We know even now that the data shows that if you are vaccinated, you are less likely to be hospitalized and die from COVID, which were the two purposes of the vaccine. The vaccine was not designed to prevent you from getting COVID. That was an added bonus, but it was designed to prevent you from getting critically ill and dying. It's still very much with us. Yes, it is airborne. I don't think that there have been enough conversations around what we call the aerosolization of COVID, meaning the air we breathe. Someone could have COVID, cough, and 30 minutes later, it'd still be in the airspace. Yes, that is a reality, which is one of the reasons why we always recommend still to wear masks when you are indoors in crowded environments. And are people not serious enough about the disease and infecting others? No, they're not. I had COVID just the beginning of June because my daughter's school didn't take it seriously. They removed the mask mandates. She got it. The school didn't report it to any of us. There were at least 6 children in her classroom who came down with COVID. And then of course, the domino effect of the parents coming down with it as well. Luckily, there weren't people in these children's lives, at least to my knowledge, that were at increased risk, immunocompromised, dealing with chronic diseases, et cetera. But I think if collectively school systems, elected officials, everybody isn't taking it seriously, then it makes it much more difficult for individuals to do so.
Thank you for that, Dr. Yola. Is there anybody who has any other questions about what they've been hearing about COVID? Is there anybody who would like to weigh in to this conversation that we're having? We are talking about what we believe about the disease, what we've been hearing, and basically where our minds are right now with the news about COVID, these new variants, etc. I'd like to invite Mr. Freeman to come into the conversation and talk about what you are hearing on your side of the community, because we all come from different sides of the community. You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate all of the wealth of information that the good doctor just shared, because she was alluding to the health disparities that we have, the inequities in our healthcare system in America, the only industrialized country in the world who refuses to provide healthcare to all of its citizens. And that's because of the fact that this is not a homogeneous nation. It's multicultural. And so we have to acknowledge that the real source of our health disparities, economic disparities, housing disparities, what have you, are all systemic problems from a system of white supremacy. That institution is what set the foundation for America to have the highest deaths of COVID of anywhere else in the entire world. I don't think we speak enough about that. And some of it was because of ineptitude. Some of it was because Trump was president, but some of it was deliberate. The fact that we had preparations to deal with pandemics from the Obama administration that was dismantled because we saw numbers in states with disproportionately Black people was dying. It was not addressed directly. So we cannot let the institutional white supremacy off the hook here. I think that what this crisis has created is the opportunity that is inevitable that this country will have universal health care for all of its citizens. The fact that they're even still debating this after this pandemic is just the reason why capitalism is killing the planet right now. So I just want to make sure that we are clear that this is not just something that unfortunately happened and that it's normal for Black people to get the worst end of everything. I remember hearing they said when America catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. And so were the cases concerning COVID. And I speak on it from a place of authority because I had COVID in December over the holidays. I think I may have had the Omicron variant because it was very bad. But I remember years ago, I participated in a clinical vaccine trial for AIDS, you know, the other epidemic, where in Washington, D.C., the AIDS infection rate was 12 times that of the national average. And I'd be remiss if I don't point out that that was a direct result of a racist Congress who has power over the budget of Washington, D.C., a predominantly Black city still. And they denied D.C. to use its own money to fund a needle exchange program. And it was the only area in the entire country with such a ban. And that was despite the fact that it had been proven that over 30% of all the new AIDS infection cases was directly attributed to dirty needles, which means for over a decade, the mere fact that a racist Congress refused to fund a needle exchange program, that our AIDS infection rates exploded. And that is a statehood right. And that again goes back to this institution of white supremacy that breeds inequities and disparities. So I always want to bring us back to center to focus on the source of all these problems, because we're dealing with tentacles of the same octopus individually and not collectively, and addressing the source. So what we're really here to talk about, or should be talking about, is systemic change, a change to a system. And I think that the COVID pandemic exposed all of those inequities of this system, whether it be from the housing standpoint, because they now acknowledge that housing is a human right, is part of the healthcare, and that was unheard of just a few months ago. So that's my immediate response to what I've just heard, and I hope that we can go forward addressing that and incorporating and weaving that into our conversations.
I appreciate your bringing that forward. And certainly when we get a little bit later on, checking the time at 7:30, we would like to break up this conversation and talking about the disease and also the vaccine. But your point is extremely well received about the systemic inequities that we continue to face. And we're going to talk a little bit about maybe what we as an educational institution that serves these historically disenfranchised communities, what we can and should be doing.
May I add a second thing, because I mentioned that I had experience as a clinical vaccine trial for AIDS. That was my original point, but I wanted to share with your audience and the people listening and participating on this panel that when I volunteered with the National Institute of Health to participate in the clinical vaccine trial for AIDS, I had an aunt and an uncle on different sides of the family die of AIDS, which made me very sensitive to it. And the Black woman that recruited me to participate convinced me that there was no cure in sight, because as the great philosopher Chris Rock has said, the money is not in the cure, the money is in the treatment. Again, this is capitalism and big pharma and all these other issues that needs to get addressed when we're talking about health disparities in this country. But if it was a vaccine, the vaccine has to be made available to the public for free. So I said, okay, so the only way that we have to a chance of stemming the epidemic of AIDS was a vaccine. Okay, so I participated. Not only did I participate quietly, I also put my face to it. I joined a public campaign encouraging people to participate. And I was shunned by many people in the Black community. Shunned, I say, shunned. That I'm promoting experiments on Black people, that I am getting paid to put people's health at risk. It damaged relationships. I had people buying me drinks because they thought I had AIDS and was dying. Well, that wasn't too bad. but that is my experience then. Okay. My point now is that for those who are unvaccinated, and I want to make that clear, that it's a world of difference between being anti-vax and unvax. So I think we should be very careful not to group unvaccinated people with Trump stumping supporters, you know, as anti-vax and what have you. It's two different crowds. An unvaxxed person is someone who doesn't have the confidence in this particular vaccine. Okay, so fast forward, for those who are unvaxxed, they are ridiculed now for not being vaccinated. They are ridiculed for not having the confidence of this vaccine that did come out of the Trump administration, I might want to add. And I also want to make it clear that mandates doesn't build trust in vaccines. Spain has one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, and they have no mandates because people have a more confidence in their healthcare system. And I think we need to acknowledge that as well. So we fast forward from being ridiculed for promoting a vaccine to being ridiculed for being unvaccinated. And the reason that, that difference is there is because of fear. People were scared. They saw the government shut down, and out of that fear, they make their decisions. So all of these things is something that we should wrestle with. And I wanted to make sure that those stories have been told as well.
Really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And we will actually have a little bit more conversation about the vaccine. I just want to make sure that we get through these questions that are coming up in the chat. There was one comment that came up, Dr. Yola, from your telling about how the school didn't have a policy in place for masks. There was a comment that it actually is scary. It scares me more now that my school district has lifted the wear your mask policy. Can you comment on that, please?
Sure, it certainly is concerning to me that coming out of the pandemic, there weren't any basic public health procedures, policies, or practices that school systems, municipalities could follow. That was my expectation. We've survived through 2+ years of this. What have we learned, and what are the procedures? And so when schools don't have procedures because government officials decide that we don't need any policy or procedure in terms of public health, then it's left up to us individually to put policies and procedures in place. And a good number of schools, because it took a lot of effort, and no knock to educational systems, it was a lot of work to navigate through all of the components of the pandemic, and masking was one of them. I have witnessed parents going off on educators. I have some of my sorority sisters are principals and have gotten yelled at and cursed out because parents didn't want their children to have to wear a mask. And so teaching the educational system is stressful enough. I used to teach elementary school before I went to medical school, so I know how stressful it can be. And then you add on top of that pandemic stress, and then you've got angry parents yelling and screaming at you. So if there isn't a requirement for there to be a mask, wearing procedure, most spaces, employment spaces, anywhere that's public facing, no one's going to do it. We know based on data, and there's a lot of folks who are anti-mask, like this whole anti-everything has been very interesting to see. And I know we'll talk about masks in a little bit, but the fact that people are like showing up to schools with guns because there's a mask mandate in place is just completely mind-blowing. So I understand why schools are like, just let us teach, right? But we know that masks provide protection. Not only should there be a requirement based on the numbers, right? You don't necessarily have to wear a mask all the time, but at least let there be metrics that schools, public health agencies can follow in order for us to know what COVID now looks like. States are not required to report out % positive, and what a % positive is of all the tests that are done to see whether or not people have COVID. What is the percentage of those tests that are positive? There's no requirement for states to report it out. Right now, only 23 states report out their percent positive data. We can't really trust the case numbers because a lot of testing is done at home or people don't test at all. The estimate now is that of the numbers we see, it only reflects about 8% of actual COVID-19 cases, and we're averaging around 130,000 cases per day right now. And so what I would say is, one, have your little one, no matter what the school says, have your little one wear a mask, especially when the numbers are up. An N95 or a KN95 mask is going to be best, but it's challenging because my daughter she wore two masks. She wore her N95 mask and the Howard University mask her father gave her to put on top of it, and she still got COVID because as time has progressed, we're dealing with more infectious variants. And unless we require public health organizations, require schools to have mask mandates or reporting mandates, they're going to fly by the seat of their pants, as we did back in March of 2020.
Thank you for that input. And we'll circle back to that question about why reporting and testing is so important, because back when we were in 2020 and 2021, that was the type of information, right, that we used to find out if there was an outbreak in a space like a school or a particular closed community, and then that would drive the decision making as to whether that space would be shut down for cleaning, et cetera. And so I'd like to make sure that Dr. Faulkner has equal time as well. Up on our screen is some of the questions that came forth from our guests, and I also have some questions coming up in the chat for Dr. Faulkner. If you wouldn't mind just kind of addressing as you see fit what's on this screen about beliefs about the vaccine.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to let you know a little bit about my background and my experience with COVID. Over the last 2 years, I actually had the opportunity to work for a health department in what was called their COVID call center. So from summer of 2020 until spring of 2022, all the questions, what is COVID? What are the policies? Everything to receiving 20,000 calls in the first hour when the vaccine became available for registration, to this past Christmas when things kind of lulled down, and then right at Christmas time, there was a wait period just to receive a test through the health department, to seeing boosters becoming available, and actually seeing not only one vaccine becoming available, but 3, and now we have a 4th vaccine as an option for coronavirus. I'm also a licensed pharmacist, so I have done some vaccinations. I have not had experience in the hospital setting with individuals that actually have had severe COVID. I have experienced loss, like I'm sure all of us have, and I think our barometer right now with President Biden just testing positive during this time, some of my questions, as I answer them, I'll sort of use him as an example, if that's okay and appropriate. And Dr. Yola, I will say to you, thanks for your commitment and all the things that you do, and being a practicing pediatrician. We finally are able to have a vaccine that's available to our youngest, beginning at 6 months. So if you have a perspective on how that's been going in your offices or your encounters, please, by all means, please provide your expertise. I greatly appreciate it. Okay, so one of the questions I see here is, COVID vaccines will be needed just like a yearly flu shot. That's currently being studied, actually. As you know, when we first termed the word pandemic back in March of 2020, we didn't have a vaccine, and it was being studied. I will also let you know that a lot of people say, oh, this vaccine was created so fast, we don't know what's in it. The coronavirus vaccine was actually in development for almost nearly a decade. And as Dr. Yola mentioned, there are other types of coronaviruses. This is the one that's been just the most severe, and that we have now. But there was funding for coronavirus vaccines. However, just as Mr. Freeman has spoken, when we're dealing with federal dollars or funding, oftentimes funding ceases for a period of time. Certain disease states become a priority. And again, I'm speaking just from knowledge, okay, on that. So it's not that this vaccine was created fast. It actually had been in development over a period of time. And then because of the pandemic, more funding was appropriated to develop the vaccine as rapidly as possible. And Dr. Yola, if you'd like to add on that, please.
Absolutely. So I put it in the chat. It's important to understand that the vaccine had been in development for nearly 10 years, looking at it in the role of a vaccine for colds, but colds are so tricky with mutations. The viruses, the coronavirus that causes the common cold mutates so quickly that it's almost impossible to create a vaccine for it. CMV, which is an infection that can impair a baby's ability to hear and see if the mom gets it while pregnant, rabies and HIV, all of those diseases were looked at in terms of the utilization of this vaccine. And to Dr. Faulkner's point, not only had it been in the works, but we actually collaborated in a way that we usually don't in the development of the vaccine that makes it feel like it was made much quicker. We got more information from places in Asia and across the globe to help us in the development. And the will was there to put the money in place for this vaccine to be developed.
Yes, absolutely. And we have to, I will also like to add that there have been quite a few scientists of worthy that you may have seen on social media posts or seen in the media. I like to say Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, and I don't recall the female's name that actually helped to develop the Moderna vaccine, and there are others that have been involved with this development. And so now we're just seeing them in the limelight, but they were working for years, on this vaccine. So thank you. Okay. We don't know what's in it. Actually, we do know what is in the vaccine. I'm sure you hear the word FDA or the Food and Drug Administration. When a drug is being developed, there's certain information that has to be released, and that information is given, of course, to the Food and Drug Administration, and it has to be listed. I know oftentimes when we go to the doctor and we get a prescription, they'll give us a sheet, information sheet, and there's actually one for each of the vaccines, and it lists what the components are of the vaccine. So that is actually listed. One of the myths that I hear sometimes is people think that it contains fetal tissue. And to the best of my knowledge and in looking at all the research, it does not include any fetal tissue. It doesn't include the virus itself. Most of them, have something that targets. You all saw pictures of the vaccine. It was this big green circle with all these spikes on it as coronavirus, like a crown. So it targets that particular virus in different areas to help to decrease the replication or the production of the virus once you contract it in the body. Okay, so I hope that helps to explain a little bit more about that. And if you'd like, for each of the vaccines, we have the Moderna vaccine for COVID. We have a Pfizer vaccine for COVID. We also have the J&J or Janssen product that we heard about. Is a third vaccine, and the fourth vaccine is through Novavax, which is actually in Gaithersburg, Maryland, is our newest COVID vaccine, and the components of it are also released either on their website or we can find it on the CDC website, which is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention website. Everything is listed as to what's actually the components of the vaccine. Let's see. Is the vaccine enough? In order to prevent, or as we like to say, I think someone said to mitigate or decrease our exposure to the virus, the vaccine is not enough. We still have to use what I like to call the 3 R's. You need to watch your distance, wash your hands, and wear your mask. So those things, I know oftentimes we go to the grocery store, you used to see, you wipe off the grocery cart or you wipe things down. We still need to do those things. Initially, we were all obsessed about doing it, but it still just becomes a part of who you are, just like any virus. When if you worked in an office setting before, it seems like in the fall and winter, colds would go around the office, the flu would go around the office. And why was that? Because people weren't wearing masks or people go to work when they're sick. So if we don't clean our surfaces and all that, viruses do linger. And there have been studies to show that this kind of harbors on surfaces, excuse me, for a period of time. I see Dr. Yola, I see your expression. Do you have a comment?
Oh, no, I was just completely agreeing with you. The thought in my head is people are nasty and cough and don't cover. And that hasn't changed since the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Another belief that I see here, let's see, you should get the vaccine. Vaccines, it is a choice. Some choose not, some of us have. I don't know if the word should is appropriate here, but we do have evidence to see that with the COVID vaccine, that it does help to not have as severe disease. I know with President Biden today, they were saying a lot about, well, it's, he's had, his series of vaccines, he's had 2 booster doses. So we like to say that he's up to date on his vaccines, but just think about his travel and all potential exposures he's had. So yes, he has contracted the virus. However, his symptoms may not be as severe as someone that has not received a vaccine, who's not fully vaccinated, who may have only had 1 dose or 2 doses and have not had a booster. So again, each case is individual, but we have seen that, as you all have seen, although there have been over 1 million people that we know that have actually unfortunately passed away from complications of COVID vaccine, the number of hospitalizations has gone down. However, there are trending up. And in things that I've read so far, most of those individuals may have not received or have chosen not to receive a vaccine. Dr. Yola.
If I might interject here, we do have a number of questions coming up in the chat about the vaccine. And so I want to invite people to come on mic and ask their questions. There was one question about whether we should still get boosters every 6 months. And the next question is, what is the risk of those who have the vaccine but no boosters?
Okay, as far as regarding about having the vaccine every 6 months, there is an institution that makes recommendations regarding vaccines, and currently that is not the recommendation. Do I foresee this becoming a part of a schedule, like say, for instance, when your children have their vaccines or you choose to have your children vaccinated for school, you have a certain schedule. You receive this at the 6-week visit or the 6-month visit when they're 1, when they're 2. For us over the age of 50, there's certain recommendations of other vaccines. This may become a part of our regimen like we receive a flu vaccine, but currently it has not been established that it's every 6 months.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I see that Bonnie Harris has her hand up. Bonnie, if you are able to get on mic, would you mind asking your question about the boosters?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I had one question is, if the boosters or the current vaccines are not as effective as on the variants, like what should be our plan? But you said that basically we need to stay vigilant about washing our hands and wearing our mask and things like that. So that was one question. The other question I had was really for Dr. Yola. I wanted her to elaborate a little bit more on the myth that the virus is a measure of population control. I've heard that a lot in my community engagement and the program that I manage. And I just wanted to, I don't have a good sense of like why that is, why people are attracted to that particular concept. So I wanted her to elaborate on that.
Sure, and I'll sort of jump in on the booster question as well, because one of the questions that I get often, especially with the president having tested positive after having received a second booster, is what's the purpose? What's the point of getting boosted if you're still going to get COVID? And it goes back to what I said earlier. The purpose of the vaccine was not to prevent us from getting COVID. It was to decrease the risk of severe infection and death. The challenge with each variant and subvariant is that with each new version of COVID, it becomes even more infectious, to the point now that the BA.5 subvariant is as infectious as measles. Measles is the most infectious disease on the planet. One person with measles can infect close to 20 people. In comparison, what I call OG COVID, the original COVID, one person could infect 5. So now one person can infect 20. So it's like rain, right? So if you've got your vaccine, you got your 2 vaccines, you've got one of those cheapy weepy umbrellas right now with BA.5. If you got a booster, you got one of those good totes umbrellas, maybe a little push button situation. When you get your second booster, it becomes that dome plastic umbrella that comes all the way down to your waist, like the $40 umbrella. But even that umbrella, when there's a lot of rain and wind, you're still going to get wet. The rain is COVID, the umbrella is the vaccination protection. And so when you still are exposed to COVID in the face of being boosted or receiving a second booster, it does decrease your risk of acquiring COVID, studies have now shown, but it also again decreases your risk of severity. In the fall, the FDA has already approved and compelled Pfizer and Moderna to create what's called, they're putting an Omicron specific component in the vaccine so that by the fall, we should be able to get a vaccine that speaks more to the variants that we're dealing with now in order to expand our protection. In terms of this sort of conspiracy around population control, we see this often. We saw this happen with HIV. There's a good number of the population, particularly communities of color, that believe HIV showed up to control the MSM population. When new vaccines come out, when HPV vaccine came out, that's the human papillomavirus vaccine, it was mentioned in social media and in the community that this vaccine was not created to prevent HPV, which is linked to cervical cancer, but this vaccine was actually used to sterilize Black boys and girls. And I have conversations with families as a pediatrician around vaccines, and I ask, well, where's the black batch? There is no black batch of vaccines. When I go to Sanofi, Pfizer, et cetera, to order my vaccines, the companies don't know what my patient demographics are, and there's no way for me to separate out who gets the tainted sterilization version of these vaccines. And when we heard these conversations around COVID, I think part of it, to Mr. Freeman's point, we don't have enough conversations around why we have the health outcomes that we do. The media and mainstream society and structural racism will have us believe that somehow we're genetically inferior, that we make poor food and exercise choices. It's all on us. It's like we don't get vaccinated because we're ignorant. No, it's none of those things. It's all about the system in which we live, and the decisions that we make are based on the resources we have available. If we do not provide healthy food options, if we do not address housing insecurity, food insecurity, income inequality, when we do not address the fact that in this country, health is seen as a business and not a right, we will continue to perpetuate these differences in health outcomes that then feed into this concern that certain diseases and certain processes in the health community are designed specifically to eliminate us. What I will tell you is when you look at life expectancy, white people's life expectancy is decreased so much so that we no longer use white people as the benchmark for how long we live. Birth rates among white people has come down significantly, hence the reversal of Roe v. Wade. So we have to pay attention to the fact that they're experiencing some health disparities themselves, but these are health disparities that we have dealt with since the beginning of our time here, since we were forcibly brought over here. That's what we have to understand. So when people bring that up about these purposefully designed population control measures, what I would say is, what's in your food? Are you using plastic or are you using glass? Are you at Popeyes or are you making your own chicken? Like, there are all these things that we have to think through that facilitate our life expectancy collectively, and particularly in the Black community, coming down. Some of it is systematic, and some of it is individual choice. And that's what we talk through.
That is an excellent perspective. Thank you. I'm going to take this moment to just do a time check. We got so deep into our conversations and we did start a couple of minutes behind schedule. And I just wanted to let everybody know that we will absolutely continue this conversation. If you would like to stay on with us, we will continue to barrel through. I'm also going to check in with my roundtable. Is everybody good on time and continuing? I'm seeing heads nodding.
Good.
Mr. Freeman, you're good? You're muted, sir.
I have 15 minutes.
Very well. Okay. Thank you for letting me know about that. And Dr. Yola? Okay. Thank you. So I wanted to bring forth a question. We have several, of course, that came up in the chat, but there was this one question with regard to what you were just saying and what Mr. Freeman was saying. This question is from Lance Reynolds. He's saying, are we seeing the bitter aftertaste of managed care and the like in the COVID age? And then the second part to that question is, would there be a better doctor-patient relationship now if clinicians were able to spend more time building trust? And since trust is such a great big factor, especially now, in terms of where we're seeking the truth in these really disturbing times, I would like for the panel to address that, please, because I have two people who have direct patient access. So please weigh in. Dr. Faulkner, we'll start with you.
Oh, a lot of doctors, their dream is to be able to spend as much time as they can with the patient. But because of how insurance is, if they choose to be compensated through insurance policies, they have restrictions as to the amount of time that they can spend with the patient, which is why you see a lot of individuals that are now have their own companies that they can spend as much time as they want. They may not take insurance. They may call it concierge medicine, the like. So I would have to say yes, that you would have a better relationship, with patients if there weren't time restrictions or policy restrictions. And Dr. Yola may be able to add more, on that. And this is my opinion to answer Lancer's question. Do I think that a part of this is from managed care? Yes, I do.
So then the question comes, is everybody going to equitably have that kind of access that's needed to spend more time with their clinicians, one, and two, do we think that the reemergence, of telemedicine might bring that bar to a more reachable level?
I can jump in. So one, I think part of the death of medicine was managed care organizations. They were originally designed to control cost because the belief was that doctors were out, and some of them were ordering unnecessary tests, doing a lot of things to generate income when it was what we call fee for service. So you come in with a bump on your arm, I order up x-rays, labs, et cetera, and it's all revenue generating. The majority of us have not and do not practice in that way. I work for myself. I own my own practice. I left academic medicine because I could not see a patient in 15 minutes. I had an 11-year-old who had her aunt had been murdered. Her grandfather died the day he found out because he had a massive heart attack. I can't see her in 15 minutes. And so the mantra in practice was Dr. Hancock is late, but worth the wait, because I was like, screw it. We're going to get up in this visit and do what we need to do. Would it result in me working through lunch? Absolutely. Would it result in me working well past 5 p.m.? Absolutely. And so now I get to create space for me to take my time and for patients to get the time that they deserve. The challenge is that it costs me. I'm still rolling my Honda and Sally Mae is still my pimp. I am not swimming in cash because I create a space for my patients to be able to have the time they need. I will tell you, my insurance reimbursements are a third of what I charge, and I do not charge a lot. And it's because insurance companies are making millions and billions of dollars. Their goal is to limit the amount of reimbursement. They play all kinds of games and put hurdles in front of you in order for it to be almost impossible to get paid to practice medicine. And if you do not work for yourself and instead work for an organization, someone is riding on your back, your shoulders, and the crown of your head to see as many patients as you possibly can in order to generate as much income as possible, not because they're necessarily money hungry, but because they're just trying to make enough money to keep the lights on. I'll give you an example, a well-child checkup. I will see a patient for an hour. Just a regular well-child checkup. You get a whole hour of my time. I want to hear your concerns, and then we go through all the 3-year-old stuff. I charge $250 for that full visit. I get paid $105. And heaven help me if I have to give them shots, because they'll only pay the base market price for vaccines. Even though I have to pay a nurse to give the shots, they don't pay for that. So I end up costing myself money in order for children to be vaccinated against diseases like polio. Concierge medicine creates more inequities. Some of my mentees that I've mentored through primary care pediatrics have gone on to concierge medicine. I don't hate them for it. I don't hate on them, I should say, for it. You've got to get paid. You have, like, just because I'm a physician doesn't mean that I've taken a vow of poverty. And, you know, they are able to create the space, but they also charge the money. It's $250 to $500 per patient or per child in pediatrics per month. There aren't a lot of families that I take care of who could afford to even pay me $25 a month. And so it's really creating a universal healthcare system, to Mr. Freeman's point, because every health insurance company pays differently. There's a timing for Cigna. I got to get the claim out in like 30 days. In Blue Cross, it's 60 days. I moved my address. All I did was move my address. I had to go through the recredentialing process all over again, and it took 4 months. Am I supposed to wait and not see patients for 4 months until I get recredentialed? No, I ended up just seeing patients for free for literally 4 months. Close to $15,000 I missed because insurance companies are stupid and ridiculous. So you can already tell how strongly I feel, but there's no way I'm going to create a space where I end up facilitating more disparities by creating a concierge space.
I'm over here trying not to applaud, because these stories have to be told. This is someone who's on the front line. First of all the service healthcare providers that's on this call, is on this panel. Thank you. We always want to say thank you for your service to the military, and far as I know, they kill people. They don't save people. Okay, we need to be in the business of thanking the people that save people for their service. And I think that we would be remiss if we don't amplify the calls for system change, because what she just described is untenable. It's untenable, and it's not sustainable. And we need to use the crisis that has exposed these inequities and the disparities to the highest level. Again, United States of America had the highest number of COVID deaths in the entire world. And let me preface that by also acknowledging, because some people think America is bigger than it is. Yeah, it uses up its more than its share of resources. It uses up 25% of the world's resources, but it's only 5% of the world's population. It has 25% of the world's prisoners, the world's biggest prison system, and we also have the world's highest deaths of COVID. And that is not enough for us to do more than beat drums to have systemic change in our healthcare system, amplify the demands in our healthcare system and in this country. Then that is on us. And the other thing, and I don't want to get away from the COVID discussion, but we also are seeing the attacks on reproductive rights in women, because that itself is racist. Because why? White women constitute 60% of all of the abortions in America because of the sheer population, and they want them to have those babies. Whereas Black women and women of color have the highest maternal mortality rates. They want them to die going full term. We're sitting here in Washington, D.C., who has a Black woman as a mayor, but at the same time has the highest maternal mortality rate in the entire country. Okay, but we're not screaming about that because somehow Black people have been made to believe that this is how it is. This has always been. This is how it was. There's nothing we can do, yada, yada, yada. And that is far from the truth. And I think that we have gotten to a point where, again, it's untenable, it's not sustainable. And I think we've had it up to here, so to speak. And hopefully we begin to a point where we can actually see some systemic changes. But it's not going to happen from the top. It's only going to come from the bottom up. And that's why I guess, you have the Angry Black Man Therapy up here to make sure that we understand, please hear me clearly, that the greatest power is convincing people that they don't have any. That's also from a Black woman, Alice Walker. So I hope that we take that to heart and we no longer stomach these stories and just say, thank you for your service for people who are breaking their backs, trying to make the best of a bad situation.
Your comments are very well received. And I think that that's what we are even doing in this space right now is a piece of that, because this work is partially to, of course, keep our neighbors and our communities informed, but we also have research that we have ongoing that we are reporting these findings. We're doing the listening, we're documenting, I'll talk a little bit about it later about what exactly our research is. And it's a nationwide study, it's called RADx. And as we report these findings, they're going directly into the NIH. So you're right, it starts with the voices of the people and it filters back. But I want to make sure that we haven't lost track completely. We've already gone to 8:09, but this is a very, very compelling conversation.
I know we're getting past, time is getting away from it,
Yes.
but in the words of another Black woman, my auntie from Watts, Maxine Waters, I like to reclaim my time. I want to say a special, make a special point to shout out my sister, my younger sister, who is not with us because she mistook health insurance for health care. And real quickly, what had happened was that she was in a car accident. She wasn't seriously injured, but she was pinned in the car. She was T-boned. They had to cut her out the car. They cut out the car to take her to the hospital. Her insurance stipulated that had she been unconscious when she arrived at the hospital, that they would have to have done a full body cavity examination of her. But because she was conscious when she arrived to the hospital, they was only legally required to provide for her ailments, her explicitly expressed ailments. She had pain in her shoulder and her neck. So they examined her for that, because capitalism that's killing the planet right now stipulated in our insurance policy, why are we going to do a full body examination of everybody where only 2 people out of 100 actually need it? So they're looking at the numbers, that's 98 times we wasted money, right? Well, she was one of those 2 people out of 100. She had a minor fracture of a rib, like a millimeter or so, that punctured her liver. She was dropping like 1 or 2 drops of blood a day. Had she been examined, they would have caught that and treated her for that. But she went unexamined to save money. So 3 or 4 months later, she collapsed in her home because she's bled out. And they rush her to the hospital and she dies on the freaking table. And then my mother tries to, obviously her reaction was to sue the company. Well, this nice, what's the word, honest lawyer told my mother that he could not accept her $5,000 retainer fee if she was not prepared to spend $50,000, because that was how much it was going to cost for them to have her day in court, because they're going to drag this out. They got more money. And if she has a day in court, and if she doesn't win, they're going to then countersue her and she could lose her home and everything else that she's worked for. This is the system that we're dealing with, and this is how they perpetuate these inequities and enforce us to accept less than. So I want to make sure that we clear, because I heard someone say something about, the doctor was saying earlier, her struggles with insurance, but I heard someone else earlier saying that if we had more access to health insurance is not health care. And I hope this story sticks with you so that you understand the difference between the two. All right, I release my time now in the words of Maxine Waters.
Thank you. What is your sister's name?
Her name was Letitia Bryant.
We're going to hold a little bit of space for Ms. Bryant. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Faulkner, are you still on the line?
Go right ahead.
I did have a question. I know that you were talking about the vaccines, but I know that you also have expertise in medication. And there was a question that came forth in the chat about, and I want to make sure that it's not missed, if there's any specific medication for coronavirus that is available. And I'd like you to kind of shift away, at least for the time being, about the vaccine, from the vaccine conversation. And I'll also add, if we haven't had an opportunity to get to your question, we will absolutely do so in writing, in follow-up. You will have the opportunity. We will do all of these questions, and we will send out all of the answers and discussion and follow-up, as well as when we post the video. Likely next week. So again, I'm going to reiterate the question. It says, is there any specific medication, and in parentheses, pills, like flu, fever, for coronavirus available? And the way that I understood that was, is there any specific medication for coronavirus that's available right now?
Yes, there is. And our most current example is President Biden. Because he's tested positive for coronavirus, he's eligible to receive a drug called Paxlovid. And for our team, that's spelled Paxlov, as in Victor, ID as in Delta. And this drug is given, and there's no out-of-pocket cost to any individual who's actually tested positive for coronavirus to take this drug. It has to be taken within 5 days of symptoms or a positive test. That is one drug. There is another drug that is also used, but not really discussed a lot, that begins with an M, and I'm looking it up as we're talking now. Those.
Molnupiravir.
Thank you, Dr. Yola. Great. And if you'd like to discuss that, it's a similar, in other words, when, say, for instance, you have the flu, they used to, prescribe Tamiflu. This is the same concept, except it's specifically for coronavirus. And it's usually for individuals that have tested positive. It's not preventative. It's only given as a form of treatment.
And just so folks know, Paxlovid is indicated for people 12 and older or greater than 50 kilos. There isn't any pill treatment for children under the age of 12. It's also important for you to know, for Paxlovid, if you are on a cholesterol lowering medication, a blood thinner, or an immunosuppressant, Paxlovid can interfere with the levels of those drugs. It will decrease the efficacy of your blood thinner. It will increase the amount of drug if you're on an immunosuppressant, or specifically a statin. So it's so critical to talk to a healthcare provider. You may not have a personal one, but whoever's prescribing the medication for you, please know what your medications are so that you don't end up causing yourself any significant complications. For Molnupiravir, the reason why you don't hear about it a lot is because of some of the concerns. The same concerns we hear around the vaccine are actual things that manifested with Molnupiravir made by Merck. Something called teratogenicity, increased risk of cancer. Molnupiravir actually causes mutations within the COVID genetic material. So there's concern that it can also cause genetic mutations inside of our bodies. The second is something called teratogenicity, is the impact on fetal tissue. So if you are pregnant or are likely to get pregnant, you need to be concerned about the medication's impact. In rat studies, it was shown to be what we call teratogenic or affecting the fetus. And then what I described before, something called carcinogenicity, how likely this medication is to lead to the risk of cancer. No human studies have shown it, but in animal studies, both of those things were shown to be of concern, which is why if you are prescribed molnupiravir, you are required to sign a form that says you will not get pregnant or you will do something to prevent yourself from getting pregnant. And we're also required to do a pregnancy test. It's very cumbersome and challenging, so a lot of people don't even bother to prescribe it. And even with Paxlovid, there's some bias even with the prescribing of it. If you don't appear to be significantly ill, I had a couple of family members who did the test to treat centers and were told, well, you don't look that sick, you don't need it.
Whoa.
And nowhere in the criteria does it say you got to look sick. Like, so there's so much bias that's infused in our decision-making processes. They just they come call me and I get it prescribed for them.
I think that there's something to be said here for both in Mr. Freeman's case and in the case that you just told us about self-advocacy. Self-advocacy. I have a guest, Dr. Noura Green, who is on the line and does have questions. If you're able to speak, Dr. Green, would you come on mic and place your questions to Dr. Faulkner and Dr. Yola? If you're able. If not, I'm happy to relay them for you.
Hi, yeah, I hope you can see me. I'm not sure if you can see me, but I have a mask on because I'm in space, but I just tested positive as of yesterday. And my son, so I'm vaccinated. I had the J&J and then got the booster for that, the Pfizer. My son got his. He became infected with the COVID back in April. And so technically for 2 years, we're the only two so far, even with the vaccine, I still support it. But my question is, do I still need to get the booster now that both of us have had the COVID and were boosted, but didn't get the second set of boosters? Is it necessary even now? I say yes, but I would like to know more and why.
Dr. Yola, would you like to address?
Sure. So there are some folks who will tell you to wait 90 days because we know that is the length of time that the optimal level of antibodies from natural infection lasts. I would say you don't necessarily need to wait 90 days in order to get your booster. If you are due for a booster, and we can talk through sort of what that looks like. If you had 2 doses of Johnson or of Pfizer or Moderna, you can get your first booster after 5 months. If you've gotten your first booster, you can get your second booster as early as 4 months. If you got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, you can get the Moderna or the Pfizer booster as early as 2 months after the last, whatever that shot was that you got. When you're recovering from COVID, so I had COVID back in the beginning of June and am now due for my my second booster if I met the age requirement, not till next year, unless they change it sometime soon. But if I was 50 plus and could get my second booster, given what I'm seeing now, knowing that I likely had BA.2, we know that BA.5 escapes the immune protection that any previous COVID-19 infection has provided. You can still get COVID, even if you just had COVID like 2 months ago with this particular variant. I wouldn't necessarily wait 90 days, given the fact that the numbers are going up. Look at the calendar, determine what your time period was for when you can get that second booster and go on and do it. But make sure, one of the things we don't talk about often is what to do with the body, with your body as you're recovering from COVID. If when you have it, you want to eat as clean as you possibly can. One of the reasons why COVID facilitates so many symptoms while you have it, and then long COVID, which hopefully we'll have time to talk about, is the amount of inflammation that it triggers in the body. Literally from what my grandmother says, from the rooter to the tutor, from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet. You want to eat as clean as possible, eating foods that are rich in vitamin A, the B complex, C, D, E, and zinc, drinking lots of water, hydrating, and maintaining as much of a normal stress level living in this country can be difficult as you can, so that you're bringing cortisol down to allow the body to calmly recover so that you don't end up having complications from it. And then if you decide to get your booster sooner than 90 days out, you don't have a retriggering of inflammation in the body. Instead, your body is able to sort of calm itself back down to be prepared to fight the good fight.
Dr. Faulkner?
Yeah, so first, I'm sorry to hear, and I hope that you're better soon. Have you been able to see or talk with a physician? Do you feel that, I mean, there is the option, unless there's some reason not, that you may want to take Paxlovid, and that can be offered to you as well?
I'm actually going to be, I didn't have enough time. I'm doing everything virtual online anyway for work, so no big deal.
Okay,
But my goal was today, but the time got ahead of me. So I will be reaching out, because it was this morning that I checked
okay,
my PCR test to be sure whether it was positive or negative. So I'll be calling the doctors tomorrow.
okay.
Honestly, my feeling, my body, it felt more like a regular cold. So some congestion, not really that much in the chest, coughing for sure, nasal drip, nasal congestion. So I felt more like a cold
Mhm.
than, anything else. When my son got sick, it was more like allergies. And so I'm more certain that the vaccines did help boost the immune system to fight it, so that it doesn't look like this grand thing. So, but I'm in that 50-year mark, so I'm sure I could qualify for this as well. So that's why I'm asking whether or not I really do need it. Yesterday I coughed more. Today I'm not coughing as much. So I don't know. But it would be helpful to know whether or not, and I wouldn't say just because you're coughing, you should do it, but I just think that's just one of the areas. I am drinking lots of liquids. I'm almost tired of going to the bathroom because I'm drinking liquid after liquid, staying hydrated, but it is what it is. I personally feel okay. I feel good, actually.
Okay. That's good to hear. Now, Dr. Yola, and since I don't have prescribing privileges, if you'd like to add a perspective as far as treating your symptoms as well, and you are doing, as Dr. Yola has suggested, lots of hydration and lots of rest too.
Yeah, I mean, this is the time. If I had it to do all over again when I had COVID at the beginning of June, I would have definitely rested more. As Black women particularly, we push past and push through. I got COVID, but I'm still doing all this work. My body spoke to me. My body was like, we're going night at 9 p.m., which is, I don't think the last time I went to bed at 9 o'clock was when I was in like middle school. So listen to your body, don't push it. Make sure that you are, like when I had it, it was very similar. My nose felt like it was on fire. That was the only thing I couldn't get around. My nose literally burned. But if you're having fever, you can definitely take a fever reducer, something like ibuprofen or Tylenol acetaminophen. If you're congested, you just have to be mindful of your other health issues. If you have high blood pressure, you don't really want to take too many of the decongestants because that can bring your blood pressure up. We know COVID by itself can elevate blood pressure. That is a risk of acute COVID-19 infection, is elevations in your blood pressure. So, particularly for children, a lot of supportive care for them, making sure that if they're having sinus symptoms, providing them with things. I use a lot of natural remedies. So I'm a very granola doc. I did a lot of echinacea. I did elderberry. I did a lot of antioxidant rich foods like acai. I avoided all meat at that time. I'm not vegan, support those who are, but in that time period to really decrease the amount of inflammation in my body, I kept it very plant-based, again, trying to decrease my risk of developing long COVID.
And to that point, can we talk a little bit about long COVID? Because there is, from what I have been reading and hearing with, again, people expressing their thoughts and concerns about the disease, there seems to be a greater focus on the infection itself and not the implications of being infected in the first place once folks have gotten over that acute phase. Could you address that, please?
You want me to talk about it?
Any of my clinicians here, because there's an implication on the clinical side and also on the vaccine side with regard to that.
Sure. So I think there isn't enough conversation around long COVID, to Dr. Green's point, because most people feel like it's sort of maybe like one level up from a cold. It's like, well, this isn't that big of a deal. But when we then look at the numbers in terms of long COVID, and we define long COVID as additional symptoms that develop several weeks after having recovered from the acute COVID-19 infection. Those individuals who are unvaccinated are at higher risk. It doesn't mean that vaccinated people don't get long COVID, but when you look at percentages, studies are now showing that somewhere between 10 to 30% of people who are unvaccinated go on to develop long COVID. For people who are vaccinated, the percentage is anywhere between 0.5 and 5%. And so those numbers for me speak strongly to the protection that the vaccine provides. There was a recent study that Karen and I just talked about via email this week, where the more frequently you have COVID, the higher your risk is of developing long COVID. So for individuals who are like, I'm good, I had COVID, I'll be fine, we have to really think through, one, the more you get COVID, the higher your risk of long COVID. And then with more infectious variants, that means more people developing COVID. So if 10 to 30% of individuals who are not vaccinated go on to develop long COVID, and right now we're about 38% of individuals who have never received a COVID-19 vaccine, 38% of this country who can get the vaccine means millions of people. And then of those millions of people, 10 to 30% of those, it's very significant. We're seeing more women getting long COVID than men, and then the symptoms look different. So for women, we're seeing more neurological symptoms like brain fog, challenges with concentration, depression, anxiety, and lung involvement. We're seeing that same pattern of behavior in terms of it impacting the body on children. For men, we're seeing it impact them more in terms of their liver function, their kidney function, and their cardiovascular health. More men are developing high blood pressure, post-COVID heart involvement. It affects the heart muscles themselves, so arrhythmia and cardiomyopathies, where the heart muscle function just doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. We're seeing that happen more often in men. I have taken care of a good number of patients. I have not filled out this many disability forms in my career, and I've practiced medicine now for almost 20 years. I have had to fill out more disability paperwork in the past 6 to 12 months than I have in my entire career, because it is debilitating. I have patients who can't go to work because they can't remember the code to their alarm system, let alone how to navigate through their job. So it isn't just, I can't breathe as well as I did before. This is impacting people's financial health, their relational health, because family members just don't understand, how are you this sick? And I was just fine when I had COVID. There's a lot of mental health associated with long COVID, but also the complications from it. When you don't feel your healthiest self, it is anxiety provoking. It is depressing, especially when it impacts your money. And we know, as Mr. Freeman said, when America gets a cold, Black folks get pneumonia, because we were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 cases and severity, because the more severe your COVID-19 infection is, the higher the risk of you having long COVID. What we're also going to see, and they have not started documenting it yet, but they need to, speaking of research, is what the racial demographics look like when it comes to long COVID. If it's hard enough for us as Black folks to advocate for ourselves in a health space, imagine how much harder it is to get diagnosed with long COVID when there is no test for it. It's all based on history and putting all the symptoms together. And when it's hard for us to be taken seriously when our chest hurt because we're having a heart attack and we're sent home, imagine how much more difficult it is for us to be taken seriously when it comes to long COVID.
Dr. Tracy?
Dr. Yola, in your practice, have you seen an increase in patients being diagnosed with diabetes after long COVID? And do you happen to know the rationale as to why that is? I know there've been some studies.
Mhm.
Do you happen to know why?
So we're seeing an increase in type 2 diabetes, even among people who do not have a family history or personal risk for it. We're also seeing an increased risk of hypertension in otherwise healthy people who had no risk factors. And there's several sort of theories behind it. One of them is that because of the level of inflammation that COVID-19 triggers, it loves red blood cells. Those are the cells that carry oxygen to the body. It impacts the function of red blood cells. It also causes inflammation of our blood vessels. And because our blood vessels connect to every single organ of the body, you see neuritis, which is what inflames the brain. You see myocarditis and cardiomyopathy, which is affecting the heart muscle and the heart rhythm. But you're also seeing it impact the liver. The liver is sort of the boss when it comes to diabetes. One of the theories is just simply the level of inflammation that the body experiences. It drives up blood sugar. Other theories are that it directly impacts liver cell function. So the liver can't readily absorb or facilitate the processes for our bodies to absorb sugar in the way that it normally does. The other is that it may impact the function of the pancreas in terms of being able to release insulin and the body being able to respond to insulin. And I'm talking people who are not dealing with obesity. These are normal weight individuals who are showing up with type 2 diabetes and hypertension who've never had any of these issues before.
On those lines also, and thank you for that explanation, is this also because the level of inflammation and the attack on the blood vessels that you're seeing more strokes, as well as heart attacks? And then someone here I see mentioned about erectile dysfunction. There's been a concern about COVID itself, as well as does the vaccine affect my fertility? So do you have a perspective on that?
Yes, so there's something called vasculitis. It's a fancy word for inflammation of our blood vessels. We've seen this happen with COVID in children and in adults. For children, it's something called multi-system inflammatory syndrome, where children from their brains all the way into their digestive system, they are showing up a couple of weeks after having COVID with inflammation of the brain tissue. With inflammation of their lungs, they end up in the hospital, particularly because of heart-related issues. COVID will cause inflammation of the coronary blood vessels. Those are the blood vessels that supply blood directly to the heart muscle. Because it causes so much inflammation in these blood vessels, we are seeing the things that you just described: stroke, not only because of the vascular issues, but also because COVID increases your risk of blood clots. So this is impacting everyone, but particularly pregnant women. We haven't even talked about the impact that COVID has on pregnancy, but pregnant women have a higher risk of blood clots when they get a COVID-19 infection. And so because of the inflammation of the blood vessels themselves and the increased risk of clotting, so much so that we now recommend that when you are fighting COVID, that you actually start taking a baby aspirin to decrease the risk of any of those complications. And to your point about erectile dysfunction, we know that the evidence, studies have shown that COVID not only shows up in sperm and decreases sperm motility and quality, it also causes inflammation of the blood vessels within the penis that impact erectile function. So folks over here talking about, well, no, I'm not gonna get this shot because it might affect my ability to have a baby later on. Well, if your penis is not working because you had COVID, then that certainly blocks your ability to procreate. We have not seen any evidence, and there have been studies to look at whether or not men's sperm cell count and their sperm cell function is impacted by receiving the vaccine. There was a study with over 2,000 people, both men and women, examined in their approach or their wanting to become pregnant. And of all the men that they studied, the only men the evidence showed that were impacted by low sperm count or function were men who had had COVID. And that impact lasted for months. So 60% of men who had COVID had decreased sperm count and function over the first month. Even up several months out, upwards of 30% of men still had dysfunction in terms of their sperm function and count. So it's important for us to understand, not just in terms of respiratory issues, but all of the organs that COVID-19 impacts. There is no long flu. There is no long strep unless you don't get it treated, right? This is a very unique feature of COVID-19 and how it lingers for so long and causes so much impact in so many organs of our body.
Thank you for providing your clinical perspective. We appreciate it.
You're welcome, my love.
Did you have anything else to add from a pharmaceutical perspective, Dr. Tracy?
Right now, no. I think going back, as Dr. Yola has explained and given us, total perspective from being a practicing physician, there's so many reasons to consider the vaccine as a level of protection and other things that we can do as opposed to not receiving a vaccine. But again, it's a choice. But again, she's kind of laid out what could potentially happen if you do contract COVID and develop long COVID. Again, there's a risk of that, and all the things that she just described gives you something to think about. Thank you.
So I'm looking at the time, it's about 8:38. I want to thank everyone who has contributed to this conversation. It was incredibly important to hear the words of our community reflected here. Again, if there are any questions that have not been addressed that you feel you need to let us know about, we ask that you either place them in the chat or you can email them to us. One of our production team will put our email in the chat. I just wanted to make sure that we got through this last bit of information and then we'll close out the call. We've gone long over. I know that you all have hung in there, but it was a really very, I think, helpful conversation. And I hope that you feel that way as well. We will also send out this slide deck and some further information about everything that we've talked about tonight. But I did want to make sure, because I did make an allusion prior, that we do have a study ongoing. This is our RCMI team. And because you participated in this event, you are invited to do an online survey with us to help us understand what is important about life beyond COVID and to help us find the best ways to share information, this being one of them, of course. You could receive a gift card up to $100. It is a 2-part survey. It's very long, but if you are interested, please absolutely let us know in the chat, or you can also send us an email to that email address that is showing up in the chat. Back to what Mr. Freeman was talking about, we want to know from you, what else could an educational institution, of course, our educational institution, Howard University, what could we be doing to better serve the community? We really want to hear from you. If you have an insight on that, let us know in the chat. If it pops up for you later, you can send us an email, again, at that same email address. We will share that information post-call. And with that, I extend my thanks again to the entirety of this production team. This was really a wonderful effort by everybody involved. Our guests, Mr. Freeman, Dr. Yola, Dr. Tracy, my RCMI production team, and especially you for engaging with us. Again, this video was recorded, but we will post it in our YouTube channel. And as we close out this evening, as soon as you ping out of this call, there will be a very, very short overview as to how you think this call went. I know that we went over. This is the longest we've ever done, but I think that people did get a little something out of it. So we'd like to hear your thoughts, and we wish you a pleasant evening. We wish you healing, safety, and hopefully no super spreader events in your future. Please keep your mask on. Please test with consistency. We will send out information about where you can get masks and testing as a follow-up to this call. Thank you very much for joining us. We wish you a pleasant evening.
Thanks. Have a good evening. Stay safe, stay well.
Thank you so much to everyone on this call for your engagement. We are at the end of this session. When you leave the call, a very short survey will pop up. This is different from the research study that we just mentioned. We'd appreciate your feedback on this call. Make sure that you follow up with RCMI-CEC@howard.edu or in this chat to join our mailing list to find out about our next roundtable chat coming up next month, or if you're interested in participating in our research. We wish you all a safe and mindful walk. Until next time, good night.